The knee starts to ache on the stairs, and the lower back begins to hurt after standing for 20 minutes. 2 symptoms, leading to 2 separate appointments. The orthopedic doctor evaluates the knee, while the physiotherapist focuses on the back, yet neither considers the role of the shoe. The knee specialist prescribes anti-inflammatory medication and suggests strengthening the quadriceps, while the back specialist recommends stretching and core exercises. Both approaches target the symptoms at their endpoints, improving how the body handles the stress, but neither addresses the original input that created the stress in the first place. Strengthening the quadriceps helps the knee manage load more effectively, and improving core stability supports the spine under increased curvature, yet both solutions only increase tolerance to compensation rather than questioning if that compensation is necessary. Now, take the shoe you wore today and observe from the side. The heel is elevated above the toe. Measure that difference. Typically 10 to 15 millimeters in athletic shoes, averaging around 12. For decades, you have effectively been standing on a small wedge. The measurement itself takes only seconds. Place the shoe on a flat surface, check the heel thickness, then the toe, and subtract the 2. This difference is known as heel-to-toe drop, a figure rarely considered despite the fact that your joints have been adapting to it since you first wore elevated footwear. Running shoes average around 12 millimeters. Dress shoes range between 20 and 40, and work boots fall between 15 and 20. Even shoes marketed as flat often contain around 10 millimeters of elevation, a subtle geometry that goes unnoticed because it is not visible from above. This wedge tilts the ankle. The altered ankle shifts the knee influences the pelvis, and the pelvis deepens the curve of the lower spine. 5 joints are affected by a small elevation that is rarely measured and seldom discussed. The knee discomfort on stairs and the back pain after standing are not isolated issues, but linked outcomes within a single mechanical chain that begins at the foot. The orthopedic and physiotherapy treatments address separate consequences, yet the shared cause remains unexamined, located below both areas of focus in a difference as small as 12 millimeters, less than the width of a fingertip, yet significant enough to reshape joint alignment over decades. When examining the ankle, heel elevation holds it at roughly 85 to 87 degrees rather than a neutral 90, creating a constant plantar flexion of about 3 to 5 degrees. This is subtle enough to go unnoticed, but persists every day over many years. The calf muscles, specifically the gastrocnemius and soleus, remain in a shortened state whenever the heel is elevated, and over time, the muscle tendon unit adapts to this position. The Achilles tendon reorganizes its structure to match the shortened length, following the same adaptive principles described by mechanical laws governing tissue behavior. As a result, an ankle that should provide 15 to 20 degrees of upward movement during walking may now offer only 5 to 10 degrees. The range is effectively reduced by half due to long-term adaptation to shoe structure. This can be tested simply by standing barefoot on a flat surface and attempting a full squat while keeping the heels grounded. If the heels lift before reaching a parallel thigh position, dorsiflexion is limited. The point at which the heels rise gives a rough indication of the lost range caused by adaptation. Many adults over the age of 50 who have consistently worn standard footwear find this movement difficult because the ankle cannot deliver the required mobility. A more precise assessment involves a clinical dorsiflexion test. Kneel on one knee, place the opposite foot flat ahead, and drive the knee forward over the toes while keeping the heel grounded. Measuring the angle or distance traveled provides insight into mobility, with less than 10 degrees indicating restriction. Repeating the test with the knee bent helps identify the limiting muscle. If movement improves when the knee is bent, the gastrocnemius is primarily responsible as it crosses the knee joint and relaxes with flexion. If restriction remains unchanged, the soleus is also contributing, as it operates independently of knee position. This assessment clarifies which muscle group has adapted to prolonged heel elevation and which targeted intervention may restore function. The measurement itself reveals more than expected, exposing how a small, consistent mechanical input can influence the structure and performance of the entire body over time. That measurement shows how much mobility the gastrocnemius adaptation has taken from you. If you can move your knee 10 centimeters past your toes while keeping your heel grounded, your dorsiflexion is within a functional range. If you achieve less than 5 centimeters, it indicates a meaningful limitation. If the heel lifts immediately as the knee begins to travel forward, that reflects a severe adaptive shortening that has likely been influencing compensatory movement patterns at the knee and higher joints for many years. This value also predicts how much compensatory stride extension your walking pattern has developed. Walking depends on dorsiflexion. During the stance phase of gait, as your body moves forward over a planted foot, the tibia must rotate forward over the ankle, and this forward movement is dorsiflexion. The ankle typically requires 10 to 15 degrees of dorsiflexion to allow this motion to occur naturally. When the gastrocnemius has adapted and reduced the available range to around 5 degrees, the stride cannot complete through the ankle. The body automatically compensates at the next joint. This compensation is not a conscious decision. The stride lengthens because the ankle cannot provide the required motion, and the motor system finds an alternative by reaching the foot further forward, using increased knee extension and hip flexion to achieve a step length that the ankle itself can no longer support. From your perspective, the movement feels normal, but gait analysis systems reveal the compensation clearly. When the ankle is restricted, the stride must continue, so the adjustment shifts to the knee. This restricted ankle creates two distinct loading patterns at the knee, both originating from the same limitation, and each leading to different outcomes. The first pattern involves impact. Limited dorsiflexion forces the foot to land further ahead of the body's center of mass at initial contact. The result is a heel strike with the leg extended, the quadriceps minimally engaged, and almost no muscular absorption of the initial force. Force plate data consistently shows an impact transient at this moment, a sharp spike lasting about 50 milliseconds and reaching approximately 1.0 to 1.5 times body weight before muscular activation can occur. This transient represents a load absorbed directly by the joint before any muscular cushioning begins. Each step repeats this event, roughly 1,200 times per mile, with cartilage bearing the full force each time, because muscle response is too slow to mitigate the initial spike. Articular cartilage is composed of about 70% water within a framework of type 2 collagen and proteoglycans. The water acts as a hydraulic cushion, being compressed on a load, and then gradually reabsorbed during unloading through osmotic pressure. This system functions effectively within normal loading limits. However, when a force exceeds that capacity, water is expelled faster than it can return, leading to progressive dehydration of the cartilage matrix. As the cartilage loses hydration, it becomes stiffer and less able to absorb shock, transferring more force to the subchondral bone beneath it, which adapts by thickening and becoming denser. These structural changes often appear on imaging years after the altered loading pattern begins. At heel strike, ground reaction forces range from 1.0 to 1.5 times body weight. For an individual weighing 80 kilograms, this equates to approximately 800 to 1,200 newtons traveling to the heel, up the tibia, and into the knee joint. The direction of this force favors the medial compartment of the knee, placing about 60 to 70% of the load on the inner side. This occurs because the force vector passes slightly medial to the knee's mechanical axis, creating a varus moment that drives the tibia inward relative to the femur and concentrates stress on the inner compartment. Over time, this repeated directional loading leads to uneven cartilage where, with the medial side thinning while the lateral side remains relatively preserved. This imbalance is a recognized early pattern in medial compartment osteoarthritis, the most common type of knee degeneration in individuals over 60. The pattern traces back through the force pathway to the heel strike created by limited ankle mobility. The lateral compartment experiences comparatively less load, while the medial side consistently absorbs more due to the geometry of each step. Every step reinforces the same pattern. With approximately 1,200 steps per mile, 3 miles per day, and 365 days per year, the knee experiences around 1.3 million loading cycles annually, totaling over 13 million cycles per decade, each one contributing to the cumulative compression of the medial cartilage. That load, between 800 and 1,200 newtons, is delivered without any meaningful muscular absorption. Earlier, the concept of Paris law fatigue described how repeated loading below a single event failure threshold can still create cumulative damage over time. The same principle applies to the medial cartilage of the knee. No individual step exceeds the cartilage's immediate failure limit. Yet 13 million cycles per decade gradually propagate fatigue damage through the matrix at a rate determined by both the magnitude of the load and the number of repetitions. This explains the situation where imaging appears normal while pain is present, as cartilage compression fatigue often exists below the resolution of standard scans. Articular cartilage has no direct blood supply and relies on cyclic compression and release to exchange nutrients. This fluid movement, driven by loading during walking, is essential for its maintenance. However, when heel strike repeatedly applies high-impact forces, the medial cartilage is compressed beyond the optimal range of this exchange, forcing fluid out more rapidly than it can be restored during unloading. The tissue begins to degrade, not due to frictional wear, but because the loading pattern exceeds its biological capacity to maintain itself. Heel strike creates a distinct impact peak that is not present in midfoot or forefoot strike patterns, a difference demonstrated in biomechanical research. I connected my own knee discomfort to this pattern when objective force plate data replaced the assumption of simple aging in explaining the persistent ache during stair use. 13 million impacts per decade, each delivering 800 to 1,200 newtons to a surface designed for distributed loading through muscular deceleration, result in structural fatigue when that deceleration is bypassed due to ankle restriction. The cartilage was not simply aging. It was experiencing repeated loading beyond its design. Beyond impact, the restricted ankle introduces a second pattern of stress at the knee, one that affects the opposite side of the joint. This pattern is hyperextension. When the tibia cannot rotate forward because dorsiflexion is limited by a shortened gastrocnemius, the knee compensates by allowing the tibia to drift backward relative to the femur during stance. This produces approximately 3 to 5 degrees of hyperextension beyond neutral alignment. Instead of maintaining a slight flexion of 0 to 5 degrees during standing, the knee moves past neutral into extension. Chronic hyperextension places continuous load on two structures, the posterior capsule at the back of the knee and the patellofemoral joint at the front. This loading accumulates with time spent standing. A daily routine that includes 4 hours of standing results in 4 hours of sustained hyperextension stress on both regions over years. The posterior capsule gradually stretches under this repeated force, while the patellofemoral joint experiences increased compression as the kneecap is pressed more firmly into femoral groove due to altered mechanics. Discomfort behind the knee during prolonged standing reflects strain on the posterior capsule, while pain beneath the kneecap during activities like climbing stairs reflects increased patellofemoral pressure. These two distinct symptoms arise from the same underlying compensation caused by limited ankle mobility. When both are present, they represent different expressions of a single mechanical issue linked to reduced dorsiflexion originating from footwear structure. The relationship between tibial position, knee angle, and patellofemoral pressure is well described in biomechanical literature, showing how small changes in alignment alter joint loading. With the ankle restricted, the knee absorbs both impact and hyperextension forces, extending the chain of stress through the body. The forward shift in the body center of mass caused by heel elevation then creates an additional compensation at the pelvis. The raised heel positions the body as if it is standing on a slight downward slope, approximately 3 to 5 degrees. To maintain balance and prevent forward collapse, the pelvis tilts anteriorly, with the front dropping and the back rising. This tilt typically ranges between 4 and 8 degrees and can be observed through posture analysis. You can see this effect directly by standing sideways in front of a mirror with shoes on, then removing them and comparing the change. The lower back curve becomes less pronounced without the heel elevation, while in shoes the abdomen appears to shift forward and the lumbar spine deepens its curve. This adjustment occurs immediately when the heel is introduced and reverses when it is removed, while long-term exposure leads to structural adaptation over decades. An anterior pelvic tilt increases lumbar lordosis, deepening the inward curve of the lower spine. The relationship is proportional, with each degree of pelvic tilt contributing approximately 1 degree of additional curvature. A tilt of 4 to 8 degrees therefore produces a similar increase in lumbar lordosis, most prominently affecting the lower segments, such as L4, L5, and L5, S1 where curvature is naturally greatest. This increased curvature compresses the facet joints in these regions, small structures at the back of the spine responsible for guiding movement and underextension. These facet joints, paired structures located at the back of each vertebral segment, guide and limit spinal movement. Under increased lumbar curvature, they are placed under continuous compressive stress during standing and walking, even though they're designed primarily for intermittent loading during extension. The cartilage covering these joints is only about 1 to 2 millimeters thick, thinner than the cartilage in the knee, which measures around 3 to 5 millimeters. Because of this reduced thickness, the facet joints tolerate less sustained pressure before the underlying bone begins to adapt. Over time, this adaptation becomes visible on imaging as hypertrophy or sclerosis, reflecting the joint's response to a load it was not meant to carry continuously. The segments most affected are L4, L5, and L5, S1, which are also the most common sites of lower back discomfort not caused by disc issues. If your back pain appears specifically after standing still for 15 to 20 minutes, rather than during sitting or walking, that pattern provides a useful diagnostic clue. Standing maintains extended posture and increases facet loading, while walking introduces movement that reduces constant pressure, and sitting removes the extended curve entirely. When discomfort worsens during standing but improves with movement or rest, it often points toward facet joint loading driven by anterior pelvic tilt linked to footwear structure. Imaging that shows healthy discs alongside persistent standing-related pain may reflect this compressive mechanism rather than a disc-related issue. While disc-related pain is associated with forward bending and compression of internal structures, facet-related discomfort arises from extension and increased curvature, meaning the mechanisms are opposite even though they affect the same spinal levels. Both, however, are influenced by mechanical factors that can be adjusted. Heel elevation has been shown to increase lumbar facet pressure in proportion to the degree of pelvic tilt it creates, and biomechanical research has documented these relationships in detail. Understanding this shift of perspective on what initially appears to be two separate issues. The chain of influence extends from the shoe upward through the ankle, knee, pelvis, and into the spine. The orthopedic specialist may focus on the knee, and the physiotherapist may focus on the back, and both can be accurate within their scope, yet neither may evaluate the underlying factor that links both problems. The knee pain and back discomfort arise from a shared mechanical input that sits below both areas of examination. One small elevation at the heel influences 5 joints in sequence, creating 2 distinct symptoms that are often treated independently. The orthopedic evaluation typically does not include measuring heel-to-toe drop, and spinal assessments may not involve testing ankle mobility. Each professional examines a segment of the system, while the full chain connects all segments through a single structural factor that often goes unmeasured. This explains the frustration of receiving separate diagnoses for what feels like a connected issue. The link becomes clear when viewed as a continuous mechanical pathway from a foot to the spine. The natural question that follows is whether this chain can be reversed. The answer lies in a gradual transition. The gastrocnemius, which has adapted to a shortened position over many years, requires time to lengthen again. Tissue that has remodeled under consistent conditions cannot immediately adjust to a new range without stress. Moving abruptly from elevated footwear to a flat sole places the Achilles tendon under tension it has not experienced for decades. The collagen fibers, aligned and conditioned for a shortened position, are suddenly required to handle forces at greater lengths, which can exceed their current capacity. This can lead to irritation or overuse responses in the tendon, particularly in individuals over 50 with long-standing adaptations. A gradual approach is essential. Over a period of 8 to 12 weeks, the heel height should be reduced step by step. Begin from the current level. Move to approximately 8 millimeters for 2 to 3 weeks, then to 4 millimeters for another 2 to 3 weeks, and finally toward 0. At each stage, monitor the Achilles tendon for sensitivity, the calf muscles for excessive tightness, and ankle mobility for improvement, which indicates successful adaptation. This process should be supported with consistent stretching of the gastrocnemius, using controlled, sustained holds of 30 to 60 seconds to allow gradual lengthening under steady tension. Each phase should be maintained long enough for the tissue to adapt incrementally. Muscle tissue typically adjusts within 4 to 6 weeks due to protein turnover, but tendon adaptation occurs more slowly, requiring patients to achieve lasting structural change without overload. Muscle tissue adapts relatively quickly, with a half-life of approximately 7 to 15 days, allowing it to add sarcomeres and increase length within weeks. Tendon tissue, however, adapts much more slowly. The Achilles tendon remodels over 8 to 12 weeks because mature, cross-linked collagen fibers are replaced gradually through fibroblast-driven synthesis, a process measured in months rather than weeks. This creates a mismatch in perception. By week 6, the muscle may feel ready, but the tendon has not yet structurally adapted to the new length. The 12-week progression respects this slower biological timeline. The same adaptive process that caused the shortening now works in reverse. Tissue that's shortened under prolonged heel elevation begins to lengthen under reduced elevation. Collagen fibers that form crosslinks at a shorter resting length gradually reorganize and extend as new fibers are added under sustained stretch, shifting the tendon's resting length toward the geometry required by a lower heel. This remodeling occurs at a rate of roughly 1 to 2% of total tendon length per week, which is why a gradual transition is essential. Accelerating beyond this rate increases the likelihood of overload. As the tendon lengthens, ankle dorsiflexion returns step by step, and this recovery can be measured. The same dorsiflexion test performed at the beginning of the process should show steady improvement throughout the 8 to 12 weeks. Each additional degree of restored ankle motion reduces the need for compensations higher in the chain. The knee no longer needs a hyperextend to make up for lost range. The stride no longer requires excessive forward reach. The pelvis no longer needs to tilt as far forward, and the lumbar spine no longer absorbs the same level of compressive force. The sequence unwinds in the same order developed, starting at the ankle and moving upward through each joint. As dorsiflexion improves, the stride naturally shortens and the foot begins to land closer to the body center of mass rather than far ahead of it. With a reduced heel and adequate mobility, the foot transitions toward a mid-foot landing pattern instead of a heel-first contact. In this position, the ankle, knee, and hip are all slightly flexed, preparing the lower limb to absorb force through coordinated muscle activity. This alignment activates the stretch reflex across the calf, quadriceps, and gluteal muscles simultaneously, allowing them to share the task of deceleration. Instead of a sharp 50-millisecond impact spike, the force is distributed across a longer time window of approximately 200 milliseconds, effectively spreading the same impulse over 4 times the duration and reducing peak force. In this pattern, all 3 joints flex together, and muscular action absorbs the load rather than relying on passive structures. Peak forces can decrease by roughly 30 to 50% compared to heel strike, as the muscles take on a role of energy absorption that was previously transferred directly to joint surfaces. The calf controls ankle motion, the quadriceps stabilize the knee, and the gluteal muscles manage the hip, creating a balanced distribution of load. This reduces stress on the medial knee compartment, decreases pressure at the kneecap, relieves strain on the posterior capsule, minimizes forward pelvic tilt, and lowers compressive forces on the lumbar facet joints. Whether specific knee or back symptoms require further clinical evaluation or treatment beyond footwear changes depends on individual assessment by a qualified professional. The mechanical explanation shows how a 12-millimeter elevation can influence 5 joints in sequence, but diagnosis and care decisions must be based on personal examination. Knee pain and back pain can arise from many causes, and heel elevation is only one possible factor. What this framework provides is a measurable variable that can be adjusted and observed over time. If symptoms improve as heel height decreases and ankle mobility increases, then the mechanical chain was contributing. If no change occurs, other factors should be investigated. The sequence is clear. An unmeasured 12-millimeter heel elevation shortened the calf. The shortened calf limited ankle motion. The limited ankle altered stride and increased knee stress. The knee compensation affected both joint loading patterns. The elevated heel shifted the pelvis forward, and the resulting posture increased curvature in the lower spine, placing additional stress on the facet joints. 2 symptoms, knee discomfort and lower back pain, were treated separately even though they developed from the same mechanical origin. Restoring a neutral foundation of the foot allows each joint above it to return toward its intended alignment and function.